Hello, and welcome to Construction Executive's Professional Education Series. You have joined the webinar titled Labor Planning's Impact on Productivity, sponsored by Rivet Work. My name is Grace Callinger, and I am the Senior Editor of Construction Executive, published by Associated Builders and Contractors. I will be serving as the moderator of the presentation. There is a handout available today in your GoToWebinar panel on your right. As a reminder, we'll also send the recording of this presentation to everyone within a few days. If you have any questions that arise during the presentation, please type them in the questions box at your right in GoToWebinar, and we will address them at the end during our Q&A session. Now, I would like to introduce Cedric Kennedy, Director of Sales at Rivet Work.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you all logging in today to our session, Labor Planning's Impact on Productivity. Today, I'm joined by Ed Tryon, the Operations Manager at Gillespie Electric. And also, while he couldn't make it, we will have a pre-recorded message today from Gillespie's President, David Burkhart. But first, Ed, excited to be here sitting with you today. We've come a long way. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you're using Rivet at Gillespie?
So I've been in the construction business for 42 years. I've been an estimator, a project manager, designer, design manager, you name it, and now operations manager at Gillespie. We use Rivet as a tool to forecast jobs from the very inception as an estimate all the way through trying to close them out. Just keeping an eye on them and monitoring periodically and looking at how our workflow is going and how we deal with our manpower for future projects.
I appreciate that background. Next slide, please. So I think a really good place to start right before we actually poll number one. So can we ask, so I think we have a question about, we're curious as to who we have here and who's here. Grace, could you kick us off on this first poll actually?
Yes, so the poll is open. So now if y'all can select whichever field applies to you, other if none of the above. I know our audience it varies per webinar, but it's typically pretty diverse. So who's in the audience today? Choose the one that applies best to you. Project manager, field leadership, operations leadership, contractor executives such as VPs and presidents, non-contractor or other. And it looks like we have almost 90% of the vote in, which is great. So I think we can review those results now.
Cool, let's take a look.
All right, so contractor executives are the majority of today's audience at 39%, other at 33%, tie for project manager and non-contractor at 11%, and operations leadership at 6%. So we have a nice mix today.
I love to see it, because if you go to the next slide, the next point was really to talk about who this is for. And this webinar is specifically designed for labor-intensive, self-performing specialty contractors. Historically, electrical has been Rivet's bread and butter, but we've naturally been expanding beyond that into mechanical and sheet metal and other trades, and we serve contractors from anywhere 30 in the field upwards of 3,000 in the field. So I'm excited to see the blend of different people that we have on today's call. I think there's going to be value seen for everybody in each of those different type of roles. So with that said, if we go to the next, before we go to the next slide, I should mention, it's really important that we understand what our mission is. And Rivet's mission for every single contractor is to deliver a labor plan, and a labor plan that helps improve and maximize our productivity in the field. And starting here, if we look at these different goals for today, the way we're going to start unraveling that and uncovering it is, one, we're going to start defining what labor planning is specifically for self-performing contractors. And then two, we'll identify why good labor planning matters and how that may be different than what we're doing today. And three, discuss how to build labor planning into your business. For this last one, Ed, could you talk a little bit about how to build this into your business and give some insight into how Gillespie built labor planning into your business today?
So we start with the estimators. the estimators bring us jobs to be reviewed. We start to build forecasts as to how many men we anticipate we need. That goes into an overall plan for the company as to whether we have the manpower or not to do the work. As we start to roll out a job, we fine tune that and determine the project schedule and work the people. The people are skill sets are tagged, so the right person goes to the right seat based on our organizational information, and then we monitor that weekly and try to see where that project's falling based on what we had forecasted, or if the project parameters have changed, and how that impacts our business, and how that may impact going forward the cash flow in the business and any other changes that may occur that affect the overall profitability of the company.
And I appreciate that, and I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into that throughout today's session.
Yeah.
But before we do that, we do actually have another poll. So we go to the next one. We're really interested to hear from the audience. How are you currently labor planning today?
Yeah, so we will open this poll. What tools are you guys using for your labor planning today? Whether that's something tried and true, whether it's a new piece of software or hardware, or whether it's a mix of something, spreadsheets, whiteboard, software platform, other, or if it's not applicable to you, let us know. We have a little over 2/3 in, so we'll give you guys maybe 5 more seconds and then we will wrap it up. There already seems to be an overwhelming majority, so let's go ahead and view those results. So probably not surprisingly, spreadsheets are the winner with 71%, and then software platform at 18% and other at 12%, with whiteboards and not applicable not getting any votes today.
Oh man, 70+% of the people on this call is living in spreadsheet hell. That's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I hope the other 18% that are in software, they're using Rivet for labor planning. But going to the next slide real quick, to really kick off the tires on today's conversation, there we go. I think just defining and level setting what a labor plan is a good place to start. And start at kind of a high level definition of what that is. It really comes down to how we allocate our people to execute our projects. And if we take a look, if we're starting with a single job, for example, for a lot of contractors, it oftentimes looks like, well, how many bodies per week are needed on this project? If we broaden that range and look at that across our business, let's say you're doing 50 projects and you roll them up on top of one another, you then start to see a labor plan for your entire business. Well, then we start to ask questions like, well, what's the capacity of our business? What's the work that we've already won? And what are the jobs that may be in pursuit that's going to be needed, or where we're going to need labor coming down the pipe? So what does that look like? Labor planning, do we have dips? Do we have peaks or spikes of our labor? Are we going to have to be running overtime, or do we need to hire or lay off employees? Can we call labor from a union hall or a staffing agency? These are all questions that we can start asking when we have visibility and we can really start to see our company-wide or a project-wide labor plan. So if we go to that next slide, we've got a couple whys. And the biggest why that we see is, and I think many people on this call will agree, and we hear all the time, is that labor ends up being our #1 risk factor on our jobs. And it doesn't matter if you're mechanical or electrical, we make money and we lose money based on how labor executes on our job site. And we really believe that there's a strong correlation between our labor plan process, field labor productivity, and project profit. So what we're going to talk about are 3 of those risk factors. But first, we have another poll. So we are hoping based on what we said today, what do you hope to learn? Grace, if you could pull up that next poll, and I'll kick that back off to you.
Yeah, y'all have already given a really nice intro into what this discussion will encompass today, but from the audience, we want to know what you're hoping to learn today, whether that's about productivity, whether that's about improving your labor planning, managing your workforce, what have you. We'll give you a few more seconds. We have a few votes for each of them so far. We have almost all of the votes in, so why don't we go ahead and review those results? All right, workforce management was the majority. It was tied with labor planning at 39%, and then productivity at 22%. So we have a good mix of everything today.
And spoiler, we're going to cover all three. So I'm excited that we've got a good even split on all of those things. So if we go to that next slide, we start getting into our why. Why number one, what we're going to call it today. And it really comes down to, those that are overseeing and supervising our labor, and that's our superintendents. And we often see these people as our most skilled, our most experienced, and most knowledgeable people in our business. They know how to execute projects really well, and they know how to unstick them, and they know how to solve problems. And this comes from years and years of experience. But instead of doing that and what they're good at, oftentimes they're spending a lot of time performing administrative tasks or working within spreadsheets or trying to find information and going back and forth between these different activities. And these are not value-added activities whatsoever. And when they're doing that, they're not unsticking our projects. Good labor planning, however, pulls the burden off of our superintendents and those daunting manual efforts that they're spending all this time into. So I think our goal is that if we can get them solving more of these problems, unsticking those projects, we're going to start to see how that impacts our budget. Ed, can you speak a little bit to how having a platform has helped your key, labor superintendents and labor stakeholders with what they're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Well, first of all, it got all the people involved in the process. It got the estimators involved. It got the PMs involved. So it's now a much more collaborative process. The second thing it did is it gave a graphical platform. A lot of what I used to do on spreadsheets, I was a spreadsheet guy. Most of the stuff I did on spreadsheets, you couldn't see graphically, and you'll see this in a second. You couldn't see it, and I can throw it up on the screen and show everybody. It's like, hey, this is how this impacts our curve, and this is what we're looking for in the future. So, there's a historical component to it too. So when I did the spreadsheets, I change them up every week. Unless I wanted to go back and go to a month ago spreadsheet, I wouldn't know what was going on. But this, you can actually see the data real time, as well as seeing how the history was between changing the forecast or what's happened on the field with the labor. So it's a fantastic tool for that.
And thank you. And I think this next slide is going to provide a couple examples that we can speak to as to having that visibility, right? So, I mean, really having a labor plan, gives us an opportunity to come in on budget and gives us a plan to win. And when we can manage to our labor peaks and we can manage our ramps, what we can start to see how our labor is going to be impacted. Compression happens, schedule slippage happens. It's always existed, but it's more and more common today. And so we ask ourselves, what do you do when you see that type of compression? So, for example, this top graph, for example, this is an example of our slippage. So these graphs right here are actually some real life examples provided from some of our users. So this shaded, bell curve area, this indicated that original labor plan. And we can see in the very beginning, depicted by those dark blue bars, that the labor was ramping up, essentially with that labor plan. But then it goes back down and ends up slipping. And we see how that impacts us later down in that project. And there's a lot of different reasons why this happens. But, how does this type of schedule slippage impact you? What are those causes? And what does having visibility into this allow you to do more effectively?
So on a per project basis, there might have been changes in what was going on the project. There may have been a project delay by the general contractor. There may be a change in a work plan on the schedule. And so you had forecasted you were going to have the manpower there, and now suddenly you don't. And so what are you doing to correct all that? That's the time to jump in, because if you look at the top graph and you see, 2/3 of the way down the line, they paid for the price for it by overmanning the project to deal with what had happened with all the tasks now stacking up. So you want to get in front. You use this type of platform to get in front of that. And so it impacts your cost. When you're putting more guys than you anticipate on the job, there's a labor productivity factor that naturally goes down. So so if you're over a certain number of people, you're seeing that they're less efficient on the job. So all those things kind of get absorbed into a profit fade or a margin fade that you don't want.
And you said some really important things there. And in having this visibility, we hear it all the time. At least if we can see it, we can start being proactive about this. It gives us that fighting chance to make the best out of a bad situation, something that's out of our control, right? And so, how did that compare? I think you spoke to a little bit. So having a technology today, without it, we hear it and we kind of say, we use this term, we're flying blind. When you were using spreadsheets, what did that process look like in order to try to communicate what you see here when you were using spreadsheets? How were you doing that?
Well, it was difficult because we didn't really have a way to graphically visualize that with people. You would talk to them about where in a verbal situation in your manpower production PM meetings about what was going on in the job, and you'd hear about potentially issues, but you didn't really take them to the next step and go, okay, well, all right, so what's this going to do for us as a job, and what's this going to do for us as a company? So you would kind of guess that, okay, well, I don't have to man up on this job, and I can use those guys somewhere else. And then a month or two later, you're talking about, oh my goodness, where am I going to get these guys to get this job done? Because the deadline's there, and we're nowhere near where we stand. And so it was just a lot of verbal back and forth. But here it becomes apparent that you got to deal with it right up front and not wait till 2 months from now when it becomes a big headache.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And I just to highlight too, I mean, this is one example, but this bottom example as well, I work with a lot of contractors all over the country. And one of the things I hear all the time is, how can we identify when people are becoming available, or how do we get people from one job to the next? And
Right.
being, intentional about drawing that labor off is so important to that piece of making sure we're not, eating into our margin towards the end of the project. We see that all too often where everything looks great, everything's productive. We get towards the end, that last 20%, and all of a sudden, all of that profit just disappears. So in this graph here, for example, in light blue, you start to see that labor is above what that labor plan was. So visually, you can begin to see we should be pulling off that labor ahead of time. Prior to having visibility on this, I mean, what did that communication take back and forth in order to communicate, hey, we need to get these guys off the project? And when you didn't, how would that impact, the next project?
Right. So, when it doesn't happen, it's a big hiccup, because we're trying to schedule, making sure that we've got adequate resources for every job. And so when you have that void, now you're telling some other customer, or you have some other potential project you're undermanning, unless you have the ability of, in a union scenario, of maybe going to the union hall. But if you're in a situation where you're an open shop contractor, you're basically voiding out some other project that you're trying to get started off the ground, because you can't get the manpower off the job that you want. And so the tug of war then begins on, okay, you tell me you need the 4 extra guys. So, okay, so how long is that going to go? Is it a week? Is it 2 weeks? And then what do we tell the other customer? What do we tell the other job about, that we were supposed to start? How do we manage that situation? So there was a lot of headaches. So it was not easy.
I'm curious too, if we ask some union contractors, how many people are on the book right now available if in a situation like this were to occur, that were just readily available as well, right?
Right. Well, you have all that too. I mean, if union halls don't necessarily have the manpower either. They might be at full employment, or when I was on the union side, we knew that we had our kind of core group, and we always wanted to keep the core group busy. And you may not want to go to the hall and supplement with the people that they have, because you don't know what their skill sets are. So that was, so it was even a challenge on the union side. But with this, you're able to manage that core group and keep them going, and then you can see how you supplement your manpower by going to a labor hall, or whatever the resources you use.
And thinking, I can't help but smile because when I see this happening, the impact in real life, it just brings so much joy to me. So we go to the next. We go to the next slide. We talked about labor plans for individual projects, but we talked about how it doesn't stop at the individual project.
Right.
We also have our labor plan for our entire business, right? So when looking at our entire business, these jobs impact our workforce capacity and impacts those dips. And if you don't have visibility into all of that, you could find yourself running overtime or overstaffing jobs or hiding people to keep them on payroll, to not lay them off. And all of this stuff impacts our profitability. So with that said, having that labor planning process for your whole business means a couple of different things. And I would love to hear about how this has impacted you. Some of the common things I hear is it allows you to bid the right work. It helps you avoid those peaks and valleys for your labor demand, but also manage growth. Having a look into your entire business and those peaks and valleys. And I think in the beginning, you talked about your labor planning starts with the estimators. Can you walk us through a little bit about how that's improved with your business?
So, an estimator comes to you and he wants to do a bid review. And so he talks you through the job, the number of hours, this, that, and the other thing. He hopefully has, if he's done his job, he's found out some information about the start and stop, when we would mobilize, what are we thinking the completion date's going to be, any other milestones that might be involved with that. We used to thumbnail that when we did the bid review, and now I put that prospective job in as a prospective job, and we forecast that. The Rivet allows you to actually just almost push a button. I used to do it manually on our forecast for on the real jobs, but we never put it in on a prospective job. On a prospective job, you put it in, it builds you the real curve, and you get to see it in that brown area that's on that graph right there. And so that you need more manpower to support where they're going with those estimates. And is that the right thing for your business? It might be a growth opportunity, it might be that perfect customer, you might be pacing work with somebody that you want to continue with and you have no choice. But if it's not, and you're going to strain the resources of your company, you don't have a project manager to run the job, you don't have a foreman with the right skill set, it's a cash flow issue for you. You're able to see that right away and say, hey, maybe we don't put in the most competitive quote for this job. Maybe it's not our right work, and maybe it's not the right time. So, but you can make all those business decisions by using Rivet as your tool to see that early on.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And you hit on a couple things there too. And I'm interested to get your opinion on one more thing with this. I speak to a lot of contractors, and even those that do have a pretty robust forecasting process, I see often that they're not forecasting every job. They forecast the big job, they forecast the data center, the hospital, but not those smaller, 5,000 to 10,000 hour jobs kind of. But those have people on them. Those are part of our labor plan as a business for our capacity. Can you speak to just the simplicity of the labor planning in a digital tool to allow you to have that more accurate, insight?
Yeah, I mean, we forecast 1 and 2 man jobs with this. It's just so easy to put it in. It takes a few seconds. As long as you have those right 4 or 5 pieces of data about when you think you're going to start and stop, and it allows you to select the people. When you're doing the actual on the forecast, you're just putting in your number of estimated hours. And so, but we forecast everything. We forecast it from the beginning. We forecast it all the way through. We take care of it we work on it every week and update the forecast and update the manpower chart and see where the whole company's going as a whole.
And if there was a thumbs up or a little heart thing I could smash on here, I'd be doing it like you could on Zoom or Teams. I love to hear that. That's huge. That's like top tier. I love it. Well, I think this is a good couple of examples, but I think it's time to kind of continue. If we go on to this next slide, we talked about a couple of different examples, but if we start going into the process specifically, the entire labor planning process that we see, and you hit on it earlier too. And this process, it starts with forecasting labor needed from the bid. going next, it's followed by what we're calling our rostering effect. The rostering is essentially identifying specific workers that are going to be needed on this project, where all of our people are unique. They're not just numbers. They've got experience, they've got skills, certifications, and all sorts of different attributes. From there, it gets into scheduling. So how do we actually assign specific people to those jobs and pull people off of work? And then from there, the dispatch or the communication of those schedules and job information to our workers. From there, we move on to measuring our productivity with look aheads and daily reports, so that can all then go back and get fed into our forecast once again. Perfect. Good workforce management now, these are a lot of different activities, and there are a lot of people and a lot of different hands that are involved with this. In order to do this well, it requires having a solid foundational process, so processes for each one of these steps that are involved.
Cedric, just before you go to that, one of the things about that is a lot of people do this in a vacuum with one or two people. It might be management, it might be me as an operations manager, but they don't. This gets the group engaged, because when you're doing it on electronic format, everybody can get involved in it. Everybody can see what's going on, and that I think is a huge opening to why you would go to a digital platform for this type of work. Is that you have all that information available to people, and it's right there for them, and it's not going into boss's office and saying, hey, I have a job coming up and I need a guy that can do this, so what do you think? And then the guy just makes a unilateral decision to go, okay, well, I think Bill's the right guy for that job. So it opens it up to everybody can figure that out.
For that exact example, that's all too common. You were doing this in a vacuum, and if you were talking to another contractor, they said, yeah, but how would I get my project managers or my superintendents or somebody into this tool? Like, is this something they're going to want to use? Is there going to be value for that specific person? What would you say to them?
Absolutely, there's value to it, because we have our project managers input their data on their job task weekly. They put in their requests for manpower. We've actually started to roll out to our foreman that the foreman can make their manpower requests. Rather, they should be working with their PM to do that. But if not, the PM may test them and say, hey, listen, I know we're going to need more men next week. You and I don't have time to figure it out, but you can put the labor request in. And so it's getting all these people at every level of this engaged in what's going on, and they become stakeholders in the whole process.
And we're going to turn this over to your fellow Gillespie,
Yes.
The president, David Burkhart. We got that video that we pre-recorded. Can we tune that up for the audience there, Tim?
So the decision to implement Rivet at Gillespie came from me. We were using as a company an Excel spreadsheet for several years, and over time, as the company grew and the amount of employees we had grew, it got harder and harder to track everything. The spreadsheet also only really gave you the information as of Friday, and nobody was really keeping it up to date or really looking at it the rest of the week. And then we started trying to track other stuff and do this and do that. Ed did a very good job, but it was still a spreadsheet. So I started looking around, and as I did through ABC, I at the different conferences would see the different videos available, different programs, and did some demos, but they always were either a little bit out of our price range or didn't seem as easy to use, which I've learned over the years with the company, that you have to make sure that it's something people are going to take advantage of and use, or you're not going to you're not going to be able to implement it. It's just going to be something you're paid for that's on the shelf. So the advantage that is when I came to Rivet and did the demo and did the laydown, it was a software that really provided everything I was looking for to replace the spreadsheet, and a lot more visibility, a lot more of the data that was in a form without having to search through it like you would with an accounting software. Some information here, some information there. they gave it to you all in a very concise baseball card, as they call it. And I found that very useful, and I thought it would work well for us. The project managers, I wanted to make sure, being the decision makers, being the ones that have to always, working multiple jobs, I wanted to make sure all the information for them, for their jobs, was at their fingertips as, best as possible. Plus also wanted something they could put information into. So when I go in and look at stuff, as the president, I know what's going on without having to always chase people down, which was the other thing that I didn't like with the spreadsheet, because once the Friday meeting was over, the data never changed until the next Friday meeting. So that was very important to me. And it was reasonably priced, which was another big factor, being a small company or a medium-sized company, I guess, in construction terms. But we always have to be worried about that. And this definitely fit the bill. And I've recommended it to several companies already. That I know that are in the same boat as us, just using a spreadsheet or even not doing anything to track their people. The other thing I really liked about this is it not only tracked where they were, it allows me to track their vacation time, their sick days. Vacation becomes very important, because when you're trying to plan out, which we could never do with the spreadsheet, you see ahead, know that a foreman is going to be off for a week and 2 weeks, or that you're going to have these guys or those guys not available when you're going to do a shutdown, because the vacation is already in there showing as soon as it's approved, and through the accounting software. So that was how we came to the decision, or I came to the decision, to purchase and start the implementation of Rivet. So the decision to
Awesome. And thank David again for the video. It's wonderful. As David was speaking, and right before this, we had a diagram of that labor planning process, and what we were hitting on was, this workforce management requires having a solid foundational process or processes at each of those steps. And that is built on top of this ideology of people, process, and technology. And all of these play an interconnected role to ensure that our business practices are successful, that the platforms are usable and provide value, and our people are all going to be involved in the appropriate way. If we go to the next slide, from a workforce management context, we can visualize this business practice in this bridge, essentially. And this workforce management bridge, you can see at the bottom, this foundation is built on top of that people, process, and technology process, and people, process, and technology ideology or framework. And when we're taking a look at that, you can look at the 6 different trusses that make up workforce management. We have our forecasting, our rostering, our scheduling, communication, information, and productivity that wraps up into our field operations. Really briefly, to kind of provide some definitions to each of these trusses, when we look at forecasting, we spoke about that quite a bit today, accurately predicting how much labor you're going to need to fulfill all of your projects, whether we break it into a project or we're looking at it as an entire business. But as we understand where we need labor, it then comes a time where we have to get labor to the job site. And that first step of rostering, meaning having a true system of record of our people, a record of each person, of what makes them unique, those experiences, those skill sets, those certifications, those nuances that are oftentimes, in our superintendent's heads, or, on a back shelf somewhere where no one else can find it, type of thing. But when we have that in an electronic, central source, we've got real-time access to it to make intentional decisions about who's the perfect fit for the upcoming assignments. And that bleeds into our scheduling then. But now we know who it's going to be. We can then assign the right labor to the right project at the right time, communicate. We can then streamline messaging through this platform to dispatch schedule updates and surface information. The next piece, information to the right people, depending on what your role or activity or the activities that you're responsible for within the tool. What we call controlled transparency. This is ensuring that the project information, the labor information, is only available to the people that is required of that role, so that we're not cluttering anyone's experience or providing too much information to somebody who doesn't necessarily need to see something. And lastly, to end this out, on these trusses would be the productivity piece. What is happening with our labor compared to what was planned? So in order for all 6 of these trusses to synchronously work within another, having that strong people, process, technology foundation is so important, because if one of those trusses fall, if all the others take on additional weight. And without this, our field operations begin to struggle, and we aren't optimizing our labor to the best of its ability. And when that happens, negative impacts, begin to ensue. And that oftentimes, because of how risky our labor is, impacts our bottom line very negatively. Ed, is there anything you would like to add to these different activities and trusses that we see in workforce management, and how bringing these together as an ideology has supported your business practices?
Well, I think, probably as an operations manager, I think more of what could fail. And to your point of taking a piece of the truss out, when schedule changes on a job, when that's not proper, that means that that information spends a lot more communication to try to figure out, okay, so what are the what if scenarios of what we're going to do about it. When information doesn't flow properly back and forth from a job site to the office, as far as what's going on with deadlines, manpower changes, changes in personnel, all those things weigh so heavily. So I can really say that if you don't follow and continue to cycle all the time through all these pieces of the truss, part of your business is going to suffer, or you're going to put a lot more effort into figuring out how to forecast and what's going on with your roster and how to meet schedules and communicating, back to the field and the clients. And it's all just going to become heavier and more onerous to get what you want to do done.
I can't imagine the gaps in time it would take if those trusses weren't connected with one another, if those are all siloed in different activities that required effort to pass that information on to the next stage, how time consuming and how much effort that could require. If we go to this next slide now, just a little bit deeper into our forecasting. So, which we've already identifying those labor needs and planning that head count. And what were some of the biggest challenges that your team faced in forecasting labor demand accurately prior to having a technology system in place?
The biggest thing was the change in mentality that we had to talk about even before we actually got the software implemented. I was starting to talk to people that this is going to be a change of mentality, because you've got to make sure that your project managers and your foremen are talking about what's going on their jobs with the milestones, with the manpower they need. Are we right sized on the jobs? And most people, with their day-to-day, the project managers are putting fires out, foremen are focused on deadlines. And this got them to a point where we had to take that 15 minutes and say, hey, listen, where is this all headed? Where are we all going? And so and then we bring that back in and we adjust the forecast. So you got to get people in that mode. Otherwise it'd be like, I've been too busy to figure it out. I haven't talked to Joe about what's going on in the job, and Joe's too busy trying to get a shutdown done to worry about any of this. So but it's so important to do. So you got to get them in that mentality of, it doesn't matter, we got to take that 15 minutes and do it for this job.
So some of those examples of, we've got these other things happening right now, we need to get these things finished before I get to updating this forecast. Having that platform, providing that real-time information, enabling people to update them in a more kind of efficient manner. What has that enabled your team to do? How often are you adjusting labor forecasts using real-time data?
Well, we sometimes adjust it daily, depending on what's going on. But at a minimum, we're doing it right after our manpower production meeting, PM meeting. We're discussing that in the meeting and going down job by job and saying, okay, are we changing? I put the calendar up and we talk about what's going on with the people for the next 3 weeks. We talk about the job tasks in our job tasks folder, and talk about, okay, well, how does this affect it into this particular milestone that you've noted in your thing? And so we get the entire team in an interactive process of how to forecast each of these jobs and try to get to the desired outcome.
And now that with the forecasting piece covered, we go to the next slide with rostering. What has been your favorite part of having access to your people information when it comes to scheduling?
Well, so in the roster, what we've done is we've tagged all our employees with, their skill sets, their work level, their skill sets, what they can and can't do. But stuff as simple as we still have clients that are asking for vaccinated workers. We're doing a couple projects at schools where we have to have, we have to be able to sort for background checks, and all that data is in there so that we can look for that information. And I don't have to be the only one looking for that. Management can look for it. Project managers can look for it. They don't have to come to me and say, hey, well, or all the people that have background checks, who can I use on my job? And so they can go sort that information and come to me and say, hey, listen, I'd like to get Steve for this job because he fits the bill and he has the right qualifications for the background check. So all that data is in there that everybody can get access to. So this has been phenomenal for that piece, but it also becomes phenomenal in the communications piece, which we'll talk about later, in being able to broadcast to all these workers what's going on. So,
Ed, what are you doing with all your free time now? Everyone's not bothering you with all that information.
Oh, don't worry, David's found plenty of other things for me to do. So, but this was laborious before. I mean, I would, teeing up all these spreadsheets. I'd worked between 3 or 4 different spreadsheets. I had a manpower spreadsheet. We had a forecast spreadsheet. We had a cash flow for a spreadsheet. And so I was bouncing back and forth with those, plus all the other tasks that went along with moving workers from one point to another. It was, I was gainfully employed doing all that, but Rivet's taking a lot out of the way.
Thank you, Ed. Well, the next slide is scheduling, moving people back and forth between jobs.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
What have you been able to do in terms of eliminating overscheduling or underscheduling on jobs?
Well, right now, like you're looking at that right there, it tells you automatically that the forecast is over or under what you're using on the job right now. So it's identifying week to week or daily. You can set that for weekly, monthly, whatever length you want to look at. But it's telling you, hey, you had 6 people in the forecast. You only have 4 right now. Why? And then you get the question, okay, well, why is that happening on this particular job? Or the infamous, we have 11 guys and we can't get rid of them, but we're supposed to be ramping down right now, and we're only supposed to have 7. So what's going on here? So you're seeing that real time per job right there as to what's going on, identifying those things. Management's seeing that, and we can react to that too. It's like, okay, well, all right, so is it a project problem that's causing this? Is it the not having the right people on the job? Is it caused by some type of customer issue, or whatever that is? We're seeing that, and we're addressing that and looking at that.
Thanks, Ed. This next piece, communication, I'm really excited to talk to you about, because I remember early on this was one of the key pieces that your team was excited about. Can you talk a little bit just about the communication in general, having a tool supporting real-time updates and labor adjustments, what that's done with your team or done for your team?
So we have uploaded everybody's phone numbers in here. We have uploaded everybody's email addresses in here. And so after a manpower production meeting, I would sit for 2 or 3 hours tasking certain individuals, hey, by the way, you're moving to this job on Monday. And I would do that for however many manpower changes there are. I didn't communicate that to the foreman. So your individuals would come back to me and go, okay, well, what's the start time on that job? And by the way, what tools are they using down there? And what's going on here? And so they'd have all these questions. So when we are done the manpower meeting and everybody's rostered up for the next week, we hit one keystroke. Every person that gets their roster for next week, whether they're moving or not, somebody who's moving is able to go in and get the data and find out what's the start time, who's the foreman, what's his phone number, what's going on, and everybody gets that information, including the foreman. Says, oh, by the way, oh, it looks like Dave's coming to my job on Monday. Okay, cool, and he sees that. So, that's a 5-minute process that I used to do for 2-3 hours and not communicate all the information. So this was a game changer for us.
What were some of the, what were the biggest stressors that you dealt with before you had this capability of pushing these notifications out? Like, what were some of the things that might have slipped through the cracks, or what were the impact of not being able to having that manual communication effort?
Well, you'd have guys potentially not make the transfers. You'd have foremen that weren't aware of a guy coming, and he'd call you at 6:30 on Monday morning and go, hey, what am I supposed to do with this guy? Who decided he was coming here? He wouldn't have any work. He wouldn't have any work for him. Okay, that's a productivity problem. So we'd have all these guys showing up at a job at 7 o'clock for a 6 o'clock start time because they didn't get the start time. A guy who claims he couldn't figure out where the job was because he didn't have the adequate address. Rivet's got an address and a map in there. So I didn't know who the foreman was on the job. Just all those questions would come up, and you'd be answering them. Some of them would start on Sunday night and into Monday morning with, okay, what's going on with this? What's going on with that? And it's eliminated all that.
Gotcha. Thank you, Ed. And this last piece here, going into the information pillar, can you kind of talk about some of the data and reports that you rely on to make some of these labor management decisions, and what are the different things that you have access to? And prior to this, where were you getting this data from?
So before this process started, we integrated this into our accounting software. So our accounting software makes an update to this every week of all the updated payroll and cash information that's from the job cost. But the most important one that I use here is what David referred to before, is the baseball cards. You're seeing each project with its own baseball card and its own piece of the dashboard, and you're seeing the labor, what's going on with the labor, where you are with the hours, over, under. You're seeing it against the project manager's projection of his cost to complete or his percentage to complete. We've adapted the bottom. There's 2 red bars there. One's the labor bar, and the one is other. We've used that to capture all the rest of the costs on the job: material, subcontractors, equipment, and everything else, to see whether that's ahead or behind or not. So all this data is in one spot, along with the roster of who is on that job at the moment. We go deeper than these baseball cards to go into job items. Down the bottom of that is you go in, and we have 2 things set up: one for vendors that automatically can tell everybody who's involved with a project in the company who the vendors are, and then we have another one they're looking at the job tasks, and the foreman and the project manager are putting in what the current items are, what the current milestones are, what the current issues are. So that we go through this every week with each of the jobs to see where we are and see if there's anything that we have to be concerned about where that job is headed.
This is a question, because this has been a really hot topic lately, and I've been posed with this question over and over. So I'm curious if this is something that you've seen, but having access to certain information like this, has this helped with any regulatory compliance, or helped you with like prevailing wage regulations or anything like that? How can that information be surfaced to help with those type of things?
Right. So the big thing with regulatory, not so much. I mean, we kind of talked about the tagging of the people, but you can set up the rosters for the people with the proper classifications and tie that back to your Davis-Bacon. The one that rings for me is not letting seasonal help get on jobs. They must be indentured apprentices. So tagging those people properly allows you to sort for and allows you to put the proper people on that project. So that's the tool that you would use, like in a prevailing wage format, is in addition to having the people with a skill set for prevailing wage, because with some of those types of projects, the way you manage them is a little different, but even in the field, they operate a little differently. So having those people that you tagged with previous experience being on prevailing wage work does make a difference.
Cool. Thank you, Ed. Appreciate that. So if we go to the next slide, you mentioned this a little bit with the information piece, and within information comes data. And so within this data, we had this process of setting up a data integration with your accounting program. Can you tell us what that's been like? Is there any other places where you had data outside of spreadsheets that we're now using Rivet for? Or was it predominantly your accounting program? And what did that process look like?
Well, in addition to being that Cedric, in addition to being that spreadsheet jockey that had the manpower sheet, the forecast sheet, the cash flow sheet, I still had to pull cost reports, because even though your project managers, you want them to be in tune with their costs, I still pulled the cost reports, on a periodic basis, and redlined them and sent them to them and said, hey, do you see this? Do you see that? Why do we still have so much committed cost on a job? And that's all in Rivet. I have all that information in Rivet now. So I don't have to go scramble around, running cost reports, analyzing the data. It's giving them data, what's going on. So when David came to me about the software, and I always he's a software junkie, and I'm kind of a naysayer about software, because I'm always concerned about what's going to happen with the amount of work that we're going to have to get it into the system and maintain it. And with this integration between our accounting software, all that integration's done. Nobody is going in, other than me going in and setting up a project for a potential pursuit. There is nobody going in and adding data to this every week. The data is coming through automatically. When we have a prospective job that's in the system, and our accounting software sees it, it automatically converts it over. And then all I have to do is flip a tag that it's either a not started job or it's an in progress job. And so that is all done. That's all done automatically. So there's no extra labor management involved with this, that somebody's sitting down and keying all this information in. And that's great.
Yes, that's our goal. Absolutely. Go to the next slide. So can we wrap up all of these different pillars within this workforce management, or trusses within workforce management? And we've talked about all the different things that are going involved and all the different activities that are happening in your labor operations. But I think we need to understand, in order to make a change like this, we need to know where we're at today and where we want to go. And one of the things that we spend a ton of time and energy in with Rivet and working with organizations such as yourself is working through those processes and mapping them out so that we can put together a really strategic plan. Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like and just this overall support and the importance of having that through a transformation like this?
Well, and of course, I mentioned the cultural transformation within Gillespie to make this happen, but the external, the coordination of this with David and myself, with Rivet, and the meetings we had to make the integration happen. The customer service that you guys have is phenomenal. You have a chat bot that's right there on when the software's open that can answer questions. You also have the people that call you back within a few hours. I don't think we ever waited more than a day or two to get an answer on a question that we had about what was going on with stuff. And then the additional support you've given us with each of the levels of users as we've brought them into the process. They've had many meetings with you guys to talk about their concerns and their questions and how it works. They just didn't hear it from me or David imparting down, well, this is the way you're going to use the software. They got to kick the tires too and say to you guys, hey, if I want to do this, how would I do it? And we all learned from that process. It became a very collaborative process. So you guys are great on support.
I appreciate it. This part right here is probably my favorite part altogether, because we get to actually truly chart out these processes. For example, what we see on here, we have a foreman and a superintendent. This illustrates how this process is becoming streamlined, specifically with our labor requests, and be able to map that out. It really gives us all the information we need as to who's involved, how are we going to train to this, how are we going to make the appropriate changes. But what I've seen, like long term even, is just the transfer of knowledge. When we have new people enter our organization, we've got a standard document showing how we perform workforce management or labor operations. It just it spreads that energy throughout the entire business.
And the historical information, not to dwell on, but some jobs go really bad, and you might be in claim situations. Rivet, you have that data. You can send that curve can be sent to people. You can show a client, hey, by the way, look what happened when you just decided to sit on your hands on this job and it delayed a month or two, and this is how it impacted us. And that information can be translated to what potentially could be a situation. The other part of like the bottom piece is that we're getting more people talking about the information. It's not in that vacuum anymore. The superintendents are talking about, the PMs are talking about it, the estimators are talking about it. They all understand the impact to the company. They all understand the impact that a forecast can have to the overall growth of the company and the overall outcome.
Thanks, Ed. And if we go to the next slide, I feel like I got carried away a little bit earlier, so I see we're already coming up on the hour. But if we want to skip, if we actually go to slide 28, I think we've got one more quick video, or this last impact slide. So I want to save some questions for a few. I see a couple questions that have come in already too, but first the audience, I want to make sure we answer those. And here's one example. Another customer, Sean, he's a member of our customer advisory committee and has also helped spread the good word, especially when it comes to labor planning. He runs the field operations at Tessiers. They started labor planning and forecasting, and he preaches this. What's the impact of not having a labor plan? It's 4 to 5% off your bottom line gone, right? So I think it's easy to see how being able to be a little more effective with our labor can make a pretty massive impact. It's such a large part of our budget. And I don't know if, just some parting, key wisdom, if there's anybody who has an inkling of, we could probably improve this part of our business. We know something's wrong. Maybe we haven't identified it specifically. What would you say to them?
I would say to them, okay, you got to get out there and you got to get your PMs talking about where they stand on their jobs with their foreman every week and get that information in. The information's got to be shared amongst management and in some cases we do it with all the PMs. You've got to share that information and get it out there so that everybody understands what's going on with your company, and have those discussions about, or do you have the right person in the right seat for a job? Do we have adequate manpower? Do we have a change that's occurred on the job? Looking at all those information, you've got to have that dialogue, not just put your head down, keep working on the fires you're putting out, and really get interactive in that planning process.
Awesome. Thank you, Ed. And it looks like I see a number of different questions that are popping up. Is this a good time for questions? Let's see. Here we go. There they go. So the first question we have is, are there any merit shop specific workflows that you use? So
other than the tagging of the people, we don't change our workflow on how the construction is implemented. We don't change it how the forecast is done. We just tag the workers a certain way so that we know that we're putting the right merit shop people in the right classification on that particular project.
Yeah, I think, working with contractors from both merit and union backgrounds, I've seen a couple of key differences, and some of that ends up being more on the union side, where if there's any restrictions of communication through the collective bargaining agreement and things like that. We have developed. I mean,
you got to be concerned about apprentice ratios and things like that. All that information, as a union contractor, you would tag what year they are in the system, because it could be 1 to 5 years. Or by periods. Sometimes they go by 6-month periods. You tag all that information in there, and that way one of the data tools that we use is making sure that our labor average cost is within ratio, that we're not running over the dollars. So, you know, if you're bidding the job, and let's say you are on the union side, we do it on the non-union side too, but you're more and more concerned about making sure that you got the right ratio, that you've stayed in line with what you bid the job, because it can go way wrong way fast. Making sure that you're staying within that margin of, okay, well, this we bid the job at, you know, whatever dollars an hour, and we're over under that, and you're taking care of business that way. So
that exactly. The last thing I'd add on that is, I mean, going back, we don't have to go back in the slides, but going back to those charts where we map out those workflows, that's one of those key things that we do with each organization, is map out what's unique about your business and how you achieve these things. Because we built the system purposely flexible to work with construction companies, you know, of both merit and union. So this next question, what did you use to manage manpower before? Why did you switch? I'm going to add on one more thing too. Ed, can you go back to the aha moment when you were like, we need to make a change?
Well, the aha moment was when David brought the software to me and one of the other individuals in the office, the chief estimator at the time, and said, hey, listen, you know, I'm thinking about this software. And this is a discussion that goes on 2 or 3 times a year with David. Like I said, he's a software junkie. And so, and of course, we go through the demo, and it was one of those few demos that I had that after the demo, it's like, yes, they have got it right. They understand what goes into developing an estimate, making a bell curve, understanding the manpower utilization, and tracking that all in one spot. And that this is the first time I've ever seen this in one piece of software.
Thank you, Ed.
Yeah.
Let's see. We also have a question. It says, what was the shelf life for your spreadsheets?
Yeah. They were weekly. They were, and in some cases they would be gone by the afternoon, because people would make a manpower change after I updated all the spreadsheets and saved them, and suddenly, you know, somebody 2 o'clock had to change, and so they could be gone within hours. And the kind of answer the second part of what we used before. Well, I had an Excel sheet that showed all the people and the jobs. I had an Excel sheet that showed all the project things that were going on. I had a second spreadsheet that had the forecast on it of where those guys, who was on each job, or what we needed to get each job done. That did not necessarily have the what do we need done. And then I had a cash flow spreadsheet so that accounting knew what the impacts of the labor were, so that we could adjust cash flow. So, and you know, we threw all those away. So, you know, we're up on time.
Yeah, I know we're on time. I see we have a few more questions. Would love to address them all. If anyone's interested to learn more, and I'd be happy to answer these questions too, you know, off this call as well. But we've got a couple QR codes here. If you're interested to schedule some time to speak with me or someone else at Rivet, you know, you scan this QR code. The left side, this Workforce Management Blueprint, is a book that we recently published in collaboration with our partnering companies, that really breaks down those pillars and the ideology behind workforce management and best practices, and what are all those key things to think about if you are considering a shift to a workforce management platform. And then the middle one here, the Workforce Management Podcast, Construction is Hard, but it doesn't have to be, is the slogan to it. And it really breaks that into conversations with other individuals like you, Ed, who's done this, who's got the experience, who've done this for decades, and have built these processes into their business, who really talk about, you know, what are the best practices in making these things happen. So I really recommend taking a look at that as well. But overall, for those who stuck on the call for a few extra minutes, really appreciate everyone's time today. Ed, thank you, and David as well. I'll make sure I reach out, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Cedric and Grace for thank you, Cedric and Grace, for having this. So awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. Thank you both so much for your insight. And again, thanks to David for taking the time to record his message for us today. Also, thank you to Rivet Work for sponsoring this webinar. All right, I want everyone to just take a moment to subscribe to Construction Executive if you haven't already. Follow us on social media from our website, and that'll keep you up to date on all future webinar alerts, any future registrations. Also, please consider to subscribing to our weekly customizable newsletter, CE This Week, again, where you can be notified of upcoming webinars and stay up to date on other industry news. Please also take the time to complete the short survey that will appear on your screen momentarily. We'd love to hear your feedback on this webinar. Within the next few days, you will be sent a follow-up email with a link to the recording of this presentation. Once again, thank you all so much for your time and attention today. We hope you enjoyed it.